Their love was a violation of interstellar law, but they didn't care asterisk. The observation deck of the U.E.'s Meridian hummed with the constant thrum of ion engines pushing through the void between stars. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison stood, the reinforced viewport, watching the swirling nebula of Sector 9 paint cosmic brushstrokes across the darkness. His reflection stared back at him, tired eyes and a jaw set with the determination that had carried him through 12 years of deep space assignments. "Morrison, you're needed in the briefing room," came the voice of Captain Reynolds through the com system. Jake straightened his uniform and made his way through the ship's corridors, passing crew members who nodded respectfully. The Meridian was humanity's flagship diplomatic vessel, and every soul aboard knew the weight of their mission. The briefing room was sparse, functional, designed for efficiency rather than comfort. Captain Reynolds sat at the head of the table, her weathered face bearing the marks of countless negotiations between warring species. Beside her stood Ambassador Patricia Hawthorne, Earth's most skilled Xena diplomat, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun that somehow made her look both approachable and formidable. "Commander Morrison," Reynolds began, sliding a datapad across the table. "You're being reassigned to the Valtharian peace talks on Nexus Station. The Valtharians specifically requested a human military officer with linguistic experience." Jake picked up the pad, scanning the mission parameters. The Valtharians were a proud warrior race, 7 feet tall with crystalline skin that shifted colors with their emotions. They had been at war with the Terran Alliance for 3 years, ever since a misunderstanding over mining rights in the Kepler system had escalated into full-scale conflict. "Why me?" Jake asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "Because you're the only officer who managed to successfully negotiate with the Korthic pirates without starting a war or losing a single crew member," Hawthorne replied. "And because you have an unusual talent for understanding alien psychology." The Valtharians were different from other species humanity had encountered. They valued honor above all else, and their society was built around complex hierarchies of respect and duty. What made them particularly challenging was their concept of emotional resonance. They could literally feel the sincerity of another being's words through bioelectric fields. "There's something else," Reynolds continued, her voice dropping to a more serious tone. "The Valtharian delegation is being led by their war singer Zarathil. She's their equivalent of a general and diplomat combined. Everything we know about her suggests she's brilliant, ruthless, and completely dedicated to her people's cause." Jake studied the holographic image that appeared above the table. Zarathil was striking even by Valtharian standards. Her crystalline skin appeared to be a deep amber color, though it was hard to tell from the static image. Her facial features were sharp and angular, with large eyes that seemed to hold depths of intelligence and determination. "The peace talks are humanity's last chance to end this conflict before it spreads to other systems," Hawthorne explained. "The Galactic Council has made it clear that if we can't resolve this diplomatically, they'll impose their own solution, one that won't favor either side." Jake nodded, understanding the implications. The Galactic Council's solutions, typically, involved economic sanctions and military intervention that left both parties worse off than before. "When do I leave?" "Tomorrow, 0800 hours. The talks begin in 5 days, giving you time to review the cultural briefings and prepare your approach." Reynolds stood, signaling the end of the briefing. "Commander, I want you to understand something. This isn't just about ending a war. This is about proving that humanity can find peaceful solutions to seemingly impossible problems. The galaxy is watching." As Jake left the briefing room, datapad in hand, he couldn't shake the feeling that this assignment would change everything. The image of Zarathil lingered in his mind, not just as an opponent to be negotiated with, but as a mystery to be understood. Nexus Station orbited the neutral world of Harmony Prime, a massive construct of metal and crystal that served as of the galaxy's primary diplomatic hub. Jake Morrison docked his shuttle in Bay 7, noting the heavy security presence and the various alien species moving through the corridors. The station was a marvel of cooperative engineering, built by 12 different species working together. Despite their cultural differences, the Terran delegation quarters were located in Section C, overlooking the planet's 3 purple moons. Jake had spent the journey reviewing everything humanity knew about Valtharian culture, but he understood that real knowledge would only come from direct interaction. The briefing materials painted them as a warrior race, but Jake had learned that such simple classifications rarely told the whole story. Commander Morrison? A young diplomatic aide approached him as he settled into his quarters. The Valtharian delegation has arrived. They're requesting an informal meeting before the official talks begin tomorrow. Jake felt a flutter of nervousness mixed with anticipation. First impressions would be crucial with the Valtharians, who valued directness and authenticity above diplomatic niceties. He changed into his dress uniform, making sure every detail was perfect. The Valtharians noticed everything. The meeting room was neutral territory, decorated with symbols from various member species of the Galactic Council. Jake arrived first, positioning himself where he could see both entrances. When the Valtharians entered, the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Zara Thill entered first, and Jake's breath caught in his throat. The holographic image hadn't captured her presence, the way she moved with fluid grace despite her imposing height, or how her crystalline skin seemed to pulse with inner light. Her current coloration was a deep blue-green, which his briefings had indicated meant cautious interest. Behind her came 2 advisors, their skin showing the muted gray formal protocol. But Jake's attention remained fixed on Zarathel as she approached the table. Her eyes, larger than human eyes and filled with swirling patterns of silver and gold, studied him with an intensity that made him feel exposed. "Commander Morrison," she said, her voice carrying musical undertones that seemed to resonate in his chest. "I am War Singer Zarathil of the Valtharian hegemony. I have heard that humans value directness, so I will speak plainly. I do not expect these talks to succeed." Jake stood, meeting her gaze steadily. "War Singer Zarathil, I'm honored to meet you, and I appreciate your honesty. May I ask why you believe the talks will fail?" Her skin shifted to a deeper blue, what Jake's briefings had indicated was surprise. "Because every species we have encountered seeks to dominate or deceive. Your people destroyed 3 of our mining stations and killed 47 of our citizens. Why should we trust you now?" "Because," Jake said carefully, "those deaths were the result of a misunderstanding that neither side intended. We're here because both our peoples are paying a price for this conflict that neither of us can afford to continue paying." Zarathil's advisors exchanged glances, their skin color shifting to what Jake recognized as concern. But Zarathil's expression remained neutral, though her coloration had shifted to a lighter blue-green. "You speak of misunderstanding," she said, moving closer to the table. "But your military reports called our civilians acceptable losses. When your forces withdrew from Kepler-7, Jake felt his jaw tighten. That particular phrase had been used by Admiral Hendricks, a man Jake had never respected. "War Singer, I've read those reports. That language doesn't represent how most humans think about the loss of life. It certainly doesn't represent how I think about it." "How do you think about it?" The question came quietly, but Jake could sense the importance of his answer. "I think about the families who lost someone. I think about the children who will grow up without parents, the partners who will never see their loved ones again. I think about how senseless it all was." Jake paused, meeting her eyes. "And I think about how we can make sure it never happens again." Zarathil's skin had shifted to a warm amber color, and Jake noticed her advisor's surprise at the change. "You feel this," she said, and it wasn't a question. "Your bioelectric field resonates with truth." "I don't understand," Jake admitted. "We can sense emotional authenticity," she explained. "It's why we requested a military officer rather than a career diplomat. We needed to know if humanity is capable of genuine regret, or if this is merely another strategic manipulation." The weight of her words settled over the room. Jake realized that this moment would determine not just the success of the talks, but the entire future relationship between their species. The formal peace talks began the next morning in the station's Grand Assembly Hall, a vast chamber with a domed ceiling that displayed the swirling colors of the nearby nebula. Representatives from 12 species observed from the gallery, their presence a reminder that the outcome of these negotiations would affect the entire sector. Jake sat across from Zarathil at the polished obsidian table, feeling the weight of history on his shoulders. The Valtharian delegation had grown overnight, with 3 additional war singers arriving to observe the proceedings. Their combined presence created an almost electric atmosphere in the room. The Terran Alliance proposes a complete withdrawal from the disputed systems, Jake began, following the script that had been carefully prepared by Earth's diplomatic corps. In exchange, the Valtharian hegemony would cease all military actions against Terran shipping lanes. Zarathel's skin shifted to a deep purple. What Jake had learned indicated rejection. "Your proposal asks us to abandon systems that have been ours for 2 centuries. This is not compromise. This is surrender disguised as diplomacy." The morning session deteriorated from there. Every proposal from the Terran side was met with cold rejection, while Valtharian counterproposals seemed designed to humiliate humanity rather than find common ground. By the lunch recess, Jake was frustrated, and the observing species were murmuring among themselves about the inevitable failure of the talks. "Commander Morrison," Zarathil approached him as he stood alone on the observation deck, looking out at the stars. "May I speak with you privately?" Jake turned, noting that her skin had shifted to a neutral gray-blue. "Of course, Warsinger. You seem troubled by the morning's proceedings," she said, moving to stand beside him at the viewport. Up close, Jake could see the intricate patterns in her crystalline skin, like living galaxies frozen in amber. "I am," Jake admitted. Both sides seemed more interested in scoring points than finding solutions. "At this rate, we'll be back to shooting at each other within a month. Is that what you want?" she asked, her voice softer than he'd heard it before. "No," Jake said firmly. "I've seen too much war, Zarathil. I've lost too many friends to conflicts that could have been avoided with better understanding." She was quiet for a moment, her skin shifting through subtle color changes. "You use my name without my title," she observed. Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I apologize, Warsinger. I didn't mean to be disrespectful." "I did not say I objected," she replied, and Jake caught what might have been amusement in her voice. "Tell me, Jake Morrison, what do you see when you look at me?" The question caught him off guard. "I see someone who cares deeply about her people. Someone who's carrying the weight of an entire civilization's hopes and fears. Someone who's trying to find a path forward that doesn't involve more death." Zarathel's skin brightened to a warm gold, and Jake realized he'd said something significant. "Among my people, to be truly seen is the highest form of respect. You see me, not just the Warsinger, but me." "You're not just a title," Jake said. "You're a person. A very remarkable person." The color in her skin deepened, and Jake noticed her advisors approaching from across the deck. "We should return to the talks," she said, but her tone suggested reluctance. The afternoon session was different. Zarathel still opposed the Terran proposals, but her objections were more nuanced, more specific. She began offering alternatives rather than simple rejections. Jake found himself responding in kind, treating her suggestions as starting points rather than obstacles. By the end of the day, they had made their first small breakthrough, an agreement to establish a joint commission to investigate the original incident that had sparked the conflict. It was a minor victory, but it represented progress. That evening, Jake found himself drawn again to the observation deck. He wasn't surprised when Zarathil appeared beside him, her skin glowing softly in the starlight. "You're changing the nature of our negotiations," she said without preamble. "How so?" Jake asked, though he suspected he knew what she meant. "You're making it about understanding rather than winning. My advisors find this ... unsettling." Jake turned to face her fully. "And you? How do you find it?" Her skin shifted through a spectrum of colors before settling on a deep amber. "I find it dangerous," she said quietly, "because it's making me hope for something I thought was impossible." "What's that?" "Peace," she said simply. "Real peace, not just the absence of war, but genuine understanding between our peoples." Jake felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that this moment would change everything. "I hope for that too." The breakthrough came on the 5th day of talks. Jake and Zarathil had been working late into the station's night cycle, poring over territorial maps and resource allocation charts. The formal sessions had become increasingly productive, but the real progress was happening in these private moments when they could speak without the weight of their delegations watching. Every word. "Your people have a saying," Zarathil said, looking up from a holographic display of the disputed mining systems, "about walking in another's shoes. I believe I am beginning to understand it." Jake smiled, noting how her skin had shifted to a warm bronze color that he'd learned indicated contentment. "And your people have a concept called soul resonance. I think I'm beginning to understand that too." The change in her coloration was immediate and dramatic, a deep gold that seemed to pulse with inner light. Jake had never seen that particular shade before, and the intensity of it took his breath away. "Jake," she said, her voice barely above. A whisper. "You should not speak of such things lightly." "I'm not speaking lightly," he replied, moving closer to where she stood. "I've felt it, Zarathil. When we're working together, when we're finding solutions that seemed impossible, there's a connection between us that goes beyond diplomacy." Her skin shifted through a rapid spectrum of colors. Surprise, fear, hope, and something deeper that Jake couldn't identify. "Do you understand what you're suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that maybe peace between our peoples is possible, because we found it between ourselves." Zarathil turned away from him, her skin settling into a deep blue. That indicated distress. "You don't understand the implications. Among my people, soul resonance is sacred. It's the deepest form of connection possible between two beings. It transcends species, transcends everything except the bond itself." Jake felt his heart racing. "And that's forbidden? Between species?" "Yes, the Galactic Council established the species purity laws 3 centuries ago after a series of conflicts arose from interspecies relationships. Article 7 specifically forbids any romantic or bonding relationship between members of different species engaged in diplomatic negotiations." The weight of her words settled over them both. Jake knew the laws she was referring to. They were part of the basic diplomatic protocols that every negotiator learned. Violation could result in exile, imprisonment, or worse. "So we pretend this doesn't exist?" Jake asked, his voice tight with frustration. "We must," Zarathil replied, but her skin betrayed her, shifting to colors that spoke of longing and regret. "The talks are too important. Both our peoples need this peace." That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He found himself in the station's arboretum, walking among the carefully cultivated plants from dozens of worlds. The air was thick with the scent of alien flowers and the sound of artificial rainfall. He was examining a cluster of blue crystals. From Zarathil's home world when he heard footsteps behind him. I thought I might find you here, Zarathil said, her voice carrying the musical undertones that had begun to haunt his dreams. Couldn't sleep either? Jake asked, not turning around. Sleep is difficult when one's mind is full of impossible thoughts, she replied, moving to stand beside him. In the dim light of the arboretum, her skin glowed with a soft silver radiance. Are they impossible? Jake asked. Or are they just difficult? Jake, she said, his name carrying a weight of emotion that transcended language. If we continue down this path, we risk everything. The talks, the peace, our careers, our lives. And if we don't continue down this path? She was quiet for a long moment. Then we spend the rest of our lives wondering what might have been. Jake turned to face her, seeing his own conflict reflected in her large, luminous eyes. The peace. Talks are almost concluded. We've achieved something remarkable, a framework for lasting peace between our peoples. But Zarathil, I can't pretend that what I feel for you is just professional respect. Her skin shifted to that deep gold color again, and Jake realized it was the color of love among her people. Nor can I pretend that my feelings for you are merely diplomatic. Then what do? We finish the talks, she said firmly. We give our peoples the peace they deserve. And then ... She paused, her skin cycling through colors that spoke of determination and hope. And then we decide if what we have is worth the risk. Jake reached out, stopping just short of touching her crystalline skin. Whatever we decide together. Together. She agreed, and for the first time since he'd met her, Jake heard something in her voice that sounded like a promise. The final day of negotiations arrived with the weight of two civilizations' hopes pressing down on the assembly hall. Jake Morrison sat across from Zarathil, both of them maintaining the professional facade they'd perfected over the past week. The peace treaty lay between them, its provisions carefully crafted through hours of compromise and mutual understanding. The Terran Alliance and the Veltharian hegemony hereby agree to the establishment of joint colonies in the disputed systems. Jake read from the final document. Resources will be shared according to the framework established by the Morrison-Zarathil Accords. The irony of their names being forever linked in galactic history wasn't lost on either of them. Zarathil's skin showed a brief flash of gold before settling into the neutral blue of formal protocol. The hegemony accepts these terms, she declared, her voice carrying the authority of her people. Let this mark the beginning of a new era of cooperation between our species. The gallery erupted in approval. Representatives from 12 species stood and applauded, recognizing the historic nature of what they had witnessed. The war that had threatened to engulf the entire sector was over, ended not through victory or defeat, but through understanding. As the formal ceremony concluded, Jake felt the weight of what came next. The delegations would return to their respective worlds. The treaty would be ratified, and life would return to normal. Except nothing would ever be normal again. Commander Morrison. Captain Reynolds approached him as the hall emptied. Outstanding work. Earth Command is already talking about promoting you to full commander. You've made history here. Thank you, Captain, Jake replied, but his attention was on Zarathil, who was surrounded by her own delegation across the hall. Their eyes met briefly, and he saw his own mixture of pride and uncertainty reflected in her gaze. That night, Jake stood one final time on the observation deck, watching the stars that no longer seemed cold and distant. Tomorrow, he would return to the Meridian, and Zarathil would return to her homeworld. They would be separated by light years and the weight of galactic law. I thought I might find you here, came the familiar voice behind him. Jake turned to see Zarathil approaching, but something was different. Her formal robes were gone, replaced by simple civilian clothing that seemed to enhance rather than hide her natural beauty. Her skin glowed with that deep gold color that Jake had learned to associate with her truest emotions. Tomorrow we return to our separate worlds, she said, joining him at the viewport. Tomorrow, Jake agreed. But tonight? Tonight, I have something to tell you, she said, her voice carrying a note of determination that made his pulse quicken. I have resigned my position as war singer. Jake stared at her in shock. Zarathel, you can't. Your people need you. My people need peace, which we have given them, she replied. But I need something more. I need to know if what we have is real, if it can survive outside the pressure of negotiations and the weight of our responsibilities. The species purity laws are about to be challenged, she interrupted. I've spent the last 3 days researching galactic legal precedents. The laws were written to prevent conflicts arising from diplomatic relationships, but they've never been tested when the relationship itself leads to peace rather than war. Jake felt his heart racing. What are you saying? I'm saying that I'm going to petition the Galactic Council to recognize our bond as a legitimate soul resonance. I'm going to argue that our connection transcends species boundaries and represents the very best of what interspecies cooperation can achieve. That's incredibly dangerous, Jake said, though he felt hope blooming in his chest. If the Council rejects the petition, then I'll be exiled from Beltharian space, and you'll likely face court-martial from Earth Command, she finished. But Jake, some things are worth the risk. Some connections are stronger than law. Jake reached out, finally allowing himself to touch her crystalline skin. It was warm, alive, and seemed to pulse with energy that resonated in his very bones. I love you, he said simply. And I love you, she replied, her skin blazing with golden light. In my language, there is a word, Thalen. It means a love that transcends everything, species, law, even death itself. That is what I feel for you. Then we do this together, Jake said, pulling her close. Whatever the Council decides, whatever our governments say, we face it together. Together, she agreed, and as they kissed beneath the light of distant stars, Jake realized that some laws were meant to be broken, some boundaries were meant to be crossed, and some love was strong enough to change the galaxy itself. 6 months later, the Galactic Council would make history by recognizing the first legal interspecies bonding, setting a precedent that would reshape galactic society. But on that night, standing in each other's arms with the cosmos spread out before them, Jake Morrison and Zarathel knew they had already won the only victory that truly mattered. Their love had started a war, ended a war, and now would change the law itself. Because sometimes the greatest act of rebellion is simply refusing to accept that love has limits. The end.